to Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
WESN.
Well, things are, I wouldn't say getting exciting, and the use of the word does not imply that I am enjoying what's going on. But arguably, things are getting interesting, academically speaking. Intensifying, that's probably a better way to put it emotionally. Sean Michael Smollett, this is talking point at WESN, content capital. Now, in the midst of an ongoing national security crisis, arguably we have another national security crisis. Because as much as the situation with regards to Venezuela is getting more attention, let's not forget we're in a state of emergency. And it's been reported, I didn't see it myself, I didn't see it myself, but it has been reported. Although I saw some of the reports where the government expressed their intentions, but the Prime Minister herself has basically said on a local television program that they are looking to debate the extension of the SOE this Friday, which one would assume it would more or less go through given the disparity in the House. Now, it's very interesting because I think one of the things a lot of people have not spoken about, and we pointed to this on Talking Point with Ashraf, more or less once the Americans started either sending ships or started shooting at boats. Our situation in TNT, technically, if it can be proven to be true with evidence, that is to say, the claims the government made as to why we have this SOE, potentially is linked to what the Americans are doing. Potentially, it could be why seemingly we're like this. Because this SOE is about networks of criminals, alliances of criminals, syndicates of criminal enterprise coming together, suspending their inter-gang rivalry, inter-gang warfare, and looking to target senior government officials in order to affect whatever kind of change they desire, they're demanding. And you could make an argument that the way how the gangs target prison officers, I wouldn't say it's terrorism, but it's borderline there. It's approaching that space, because it's not just, oh, well, the prison officer did me something personal, so I do something back personal. No, it's about, you're not giving me the privileges I want, so I'm going to use the threat of force or the actual use of force, not just to remove the person that is the obstacle, but also to send a message, hey, next person in line, you give me what I want. And in its very most basic form, that is essentially what terrorism is. You are trying to change political policy, or in this case, prison service policy. But it's borderline. I'm not necessarily looking to say, hey, it is definitely terrorism. But that mentality now, if you take it a step further and you apply that now to the government, because now it's not just something between you and the prison service. And again, one wonders, in a country where we have concerns over extrajudicial killings, and maybe this is to tell you how loose and not professional enough the criminal justice system is. With the threat of extrajudicial killings, somehow the criminals still have the upper hand. Think about that. Think about the fact that even in a time when, because it wasn't that long ago, where inmates died mysteriously in the custody of prison officers, and yet somehow certain prisoners are more than comfortable of threatening these officers and even killing some prison officers. I wouldn't necessarily know for sure if the officers who died were involved in whatever mysterious circumstances that led to the death of those prisoners. Regardless, it logically does not make sense to me. The system is so bad that all of these things could happen at the same time. I could see where criminals now start to think, hey, you know, we can apply this to the politicians. If agents of the states, the members of the state who have the authority to utilize the state monopoly on violence, if they can't stop us, what are the politicians going to do? So, of course, now we have a state of emergency. And this is one of those things where it's not that I like that we're under state of emergency. I dislike that we're under state of emergency. That doesn't mean that I think we shouldn't be under state of emergency. I have no issue. This is not the fault of the government. Why are we under state of emergency still? They need to solve it already. No, the problem is probably bigger than we would understand. But to what extent are the specific claims that the government made, are they 100% the truth or the only aspect of the truth? Is there more they're not telling us? Is it not quite so simplistic? Are there shades of gray? We don't know. Maybe the threats against the politicians is what they're willing to say, but there were more specific things in other areas. I don't know. But what I do find interesting is it gives more direct credence to the Americans' narco-terrorism claims than just about anything the Americans have shown, right? In part because since terrorism or anti-terrorism laws were to some extent crafted around the times when laws against illegal narcotics were also crafted, right? Somewhere around like the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. And of course, it was not like a singular moment in time when these laws were written. They were evaluated and they evolved over time and changed over time, etc., as new circumstances and challenges came up. But you could argue post-World War II, post-Vietnam, that's when these things became more and more, they more and more started to resemble the modern iterations. But they were never utilized together. And arguably that precedent, even when you had transnational drug smuggling networks and the criminal enterprises around them, utilizing their vast financial, or albeit ill-begotten, gained financial resources, as well as their willingness for violence, their ability to corrupt public officials, and then threaten those they can't corrupt, and then kill those that the threats don't work on. All of that borderline is terrorism. Conceptually, it's very interesting that Trump is the first one to try this tact. I don't know if there was someone in the Department of Defense or in the U.S. Department of Justice, I think it is, right, that maybe had this, theoretically we could do this, but no one's ever been willing to try. However, the precedent was set. This usually doesn't apply. The link is tenuous at best, at least in terms of the civilian population buy-in and support for such endeavors, which is going to undermine potentially the support of your military personnel. That's why that admiral, we question. I haven't seen anything that officially said that's why he's out. But it makes sense, and there's no alternative explanation, so we go with that. So, of course, there's an illegal immigration issue on top of the rest of the SOE, where that's more targeting criminals. That has come up now, and that will be a bigger issue if the situation in Venezuela destabilizes. In fact, one could argue, and this is one of those unintended benefits, I guess you could say. But I do wonder, though, arguably, we probably need a state of emergency, depending on how things turn out in Venezuela. Because the fallout could include a greater number of asylum seekers, people trying to escape the situation, as well as criminals, whether they're connected to Maduro or not. They don't want to stay around, potentially. Not the big bosses anyway, if they're still there. They will probably want to flee, find some place to ride out whatever the Americans want to do, especially since they say, we're going after narco-terrorists, right? So I wouldn't take the chance. The problem is, of course, you know, some will go to Colombia, some might try to go to Guyana. I don't know to what extent they could go south of Venezuela through the jungle. And then there's us. There's little old TNT. And we might get more illegal migrants here as part of the fallout if anything happens in Venezuela. And arguably, we would need a state of emergency just to try to have a handle on what's going on. But the question is, to what extent, if anything was to kick off in Venezuela, will we need to either amend the SOE, because it might bring up challenges that the current SOE regulations, it wasn't necessarily declared or to deal with any fallout of an international incident to a neighboring country. I don't know if it needs to be updated, because now it won't just be criminals that we have to worry about. We'll also have to worry about what we're going to do if we see a flood of refugees if Venezuela collapses, right? What do we do? Do we send them back? If the situation is that bad, sending them back might be inhumane. Can we absorb more refugees? I don't know. That's one of those things where arguably, ideally, with the state our economy is in, because if we can't provide them, if our society does not have the capacity to provide them in whichever distribution channel that is available or possible or practical, right? So it's not just about charity. The long and short is they have to have some place to live and they have to have food to eat. And those things don't just fall from the sky. So whether it's charity, whether it's programs, and I can't remember if this was on air or maybe off air, someone was lamenting the fact that Venezuelans might be in CPEP. Well, to some extent, if CPEP was actually operating how it's supposed to, which was in part a short-term program to help people integrate into the job market, why not send migrants that way? Or asylum seekers once they have been approved that way? Because it's not as though it's going to be a permanent job, right? But unfortunately, again, because we don't necessarily do things properly, the issues with one situation then compounds itself in other situations. So now our criminal issue, our high crime issue, the lethargy of our criminal justice system, the loopholes in our laws that deal with criminal activity, the, at times, certain deficiencies in the protective services of the country, we find ourselves ill-equipped to deal with any potential fallout between any sort of conflict between America and Venezuela. Now, that doesn't mean that we will face very bad consequences. But, I mean, we could get lucky. It might turn out, it might end well. You know? No one's banking on that. You can't have that expectation reasonably. But it can happen, but that's not something you should plan or hope for. And especially at a time now when we have the situation in Jamaica, CARICOM is now have to dealing with itself two crises. And arguably, our government has to some extent expressed willingness to support Jamaica. That means we will be looking at least for in the short term, for a limited time period, three crises. We have our own SOE, we have a neighbor that might have conflict with one of our major, if not the major trading partner for our country. And then, of course, one of the largest countries in the Caribbean region, and CARICOM specifically, and the English-speaking Caribbean, largest independent countries, is now going to be hit with what might be one of the worst hurricanes that has ever been hit by for years. Hopefully, it does not set back their economic development. Because if anyone has any hopes for anything positive with CARICOM, you need everyone having as much capacity to move forward as possible so we can support each other and pull each other moving forward. But that whole CARICOM thing, we'll get into that later. It is what it is, right? But I always said the SOE is to cover up deficiencies. It's to compensate for deficiencies in how our laws have been drafted and crafted and passed. I mean, at the end of the day, people are not supposed to be smoking weed in public, but right now, it's more or less set up where, and people have realized, hey, what are they going to do if I smoke weed in public? What are they going to do? Right? The noise pollution thing has the EMA and the TTPS basically doing the Spider-Man meme. No, it's you're supposed to do it. No, you, right? And then you could maybe put Parliament as the third wheel, except no one really calls out Parliament on this, but I do. No one else points the finger to them, but I do, because at the very least, leadership is not ignoring a problem. Leadership is not telling you what you want to hear. Leadership is telling you what you need to hear, even if you don't like it, right? But more importantly, leadership is to tell you things that you need to hear, even if, and especially when you don't know that you need to hear it. And it seems as though most people are on their laurels about the noise pollution question. But think about how simple it should be, at least to set up a proper framework. If you want to say there's police corruption or EMA corruption or corruption in public service that's hampering this, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But at the very least, fix this system at the surface level. At least give us the veneer of something that's supposed to be working. But we don't have that. And we have a lot of attention paid on a lot of nonsense. But basically, you want people to be a society of law and order, to live in a society of law and order. You can't just shirk your responsibility because you think, let the people fat, distract them from the bullets. The breakdown happens on all levels. So now, as a society, as a laissez-faire society that takes law and order semi-seriously, when the mood suits us and it doesn't cost us anything and it doesn't inconvenience our entertainment value. Now that we have crises going on that potentially will affect us, but they're coming from external sources of which we have very limited control, if any at all. We don't have the capacity we should have to be able to respond to these things, because not every challenge is going to be something that you could nip in the bud, you could head off at the pass, you have total control over. And not every international situation, and this is what annoys the hell out of me with the commentary on this, not everything can be handled with diplomacy. I'll give you a hint. Everybody puts their own job and they think of problems in the lens of their job, and they think their job, their perspective, their expertise will be the solution to this problem. There's a geologist that thinks climate change is due to tectonic activity, and he might be right, but I have to remind myself one of the reasons why he's probably saying that is because he's a geologist. So he's looking at a geological issue. That's where he wants the problem to come from. That's where his biases lie. Diplomats think everything could be solved with diplomacy. But if that's true, why isn't there peace in the Middle East between Palestine and Israel? Why is it taking so long? Right? Why couldn't North Korea be solved with diplomacy? Why did Russia invade Ukraine while depending on Europe to be one of their big markets for the export of their natural gas? The whole Russia-Ukraine war basically broke the back of the concept of diplomacy that the EU was using in order to try to maintain peaceful relationships with Russia. And it was a slap in the face of the main EU leadership, particularly Germany. Diplomacy is not necessarily going to solve everything. And I'm not advocating war. I'm just saying we shouldn't necessarily expect that to happen. How then do we respond to the fallout? Can we do it? I don't think so, because we're not a nation of people that takes life that seriously. If we did, our political system won't be the crap show that it is now. And it's not to say that the same individuals involved couldn't do a better job. They are intelligent enough to do a better job. But in part, they take their cues from us. So, we shouldn't be in a state of emergency, but we are. And I've yet to see anything to say we're going to rectify some of the problems to at least reach a minimal point that we wouldn't have to rely on a state of emergency moving forward. Because part of this whole thing was probably kicked off by the change in government. And it doesn't have to be that the government wants to take away things from PNM supporters, but it makes changes. And in doing so, you're going to upset apple carts. This is why the PNM did not make some of these changes, because they weren't willing to upset some of these apple carts. They weren't willing to upset the status quo that certain elements of society, whether legal or illegal, were depending and profiting from. So we get what we get. One systemic failure is compounding another systemic failure, which is compounding another systemic failure. Criminal justice is bad. Weakens the national security services. National security services are bad. We're not necessarily prepared for any sorts of crisis in the region that could have spillover effects on us. But this is human nature. This is not just Trinidad and Tobago. Maybe we need to feel a consequence to take life seriously. Because there are too many songs that imply we don't. Too many popular songs that speaks at least some truth to the culture of this nation. Not necessarily to throw the songwriters on the bus because it's a great song, but we jam in still. It should be a message of resilience. But are we really, think about it. When do we show resilience as opposed to the negative side of that sentiment? All right. Technically, this is all on just having the SOE. I know I mentioned the Venezuela situation more. We'll get into that. Venezuela has decided to take steps and it has caused an alarm. We'll get into that later, but there's a couple other things I want to get into first, right? It seems as though, by the way, it seems as though it's going to be extended by 6 months. Again, if we don't see follow-up legislative updates or changes or improvements, as well as probably some improvements in the protective services, particularly Coast Guard, in terms of resources and accountability and what is their mission. Not so much resources for the Defense Force, but the TTPS probably resources. I don't know if 6 months is going to be enough, because when it's finished, maybe the meter rate stays down, maybe it doesn't, right? The Police Association acting president is urging those in authority to be mindful of the increase in demand and strain placed on police officers. And this goes to the resources, not just financial, but also in terms of personnel, right? Now we're in a rock and a hard place, because increasing personnel, that's a bigger strain on financial resources. Arguably, I don't know if it makes sense to increase the police service. At some point, you're going to increase it to be where it's impractical, at least in the long run. But it's not as though you could take on police officers on a temporary basis. You can't have police officers for a season like you could have waitresses, right? It's not the same thing. So, but I understand, this is, I believe, ASP Pitt, who is one of the TTPS media ambassadors. It is a concern. It's something that I've said for years now, ever since COVID, right? But this is the thing. Unfortunately, it could be a product of the demands and the needs of the situation, and the fault is not that the demands and needs of the situation are unrealistic. It might be not necessarily the most practical thing, but it might be necessary. But the fault for this ultimately might lie in the breakdown of the criminal justice system that's allowed the situation to get out of hand. You can't just get more personnel to control the situation that's increased in scope and scale. It's not practical. It's increasing exponentially. You could only increase by addition, not multiplicatively. So, this is a thing where the SOE and maybe even there's some unintended benefit, well, maybe not unintended, but some minor benefit from the interdiction of drug smuggling into the country. Maybe now is the time maybe to try and get ducks in a row to bring it down, because we'll never, in theory, have enough police officers to add on top of to increase the number in order to compensate for the exponential rise in violent crime that we see at times. And generally speaking, even though one could say maybe it's lower than, say, last year or the year before, this general period of the last few years, crime is higher than similar periods before now, meaning the last few years. So again, one situation compounds and worsens another situation. Because at the end of the day, if police officers start to die from health-related diseases due to stress and overwork, just saying. Speaking about stress and overwork, fire officers had to hold 4 men. And the report says 4 men, one of which is a 13-year-old boy. They're robbing a fire station now. Now, granted, they didn't rob the fire station of fire equipment, I believe. It was more personal devices, cell phones, chargers, stuff like that, personal electronics and other personal items. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess they were all young men. That's the implication of the reporting, but it hasn't been confirmed what the ages are of the other 3. But we're seeing more either, not even old teenagers, very young teenagers or pre-teens being in the papers for criminal activity. We're not a society of law and order, folks. Maybe we were, but we were an informal one, and this is, to some extent, the price you pay, where you rely too much on informal cultural norms. But you continue to grow. And now perhaps our growth has outstripped the informal culture that kept things together for so long, between colonialism and now. Yes, the implication of that statement is somewhat intentional. I won't go any further there. I brought this up yesterday very, very briefly. I didn't go into details when I should have. Facebook Marketplace. This was with regards to a farmer being robbed when he was looking to buy animals. This is one of those things where the farmer probably didn't think, or they would look to scam using a fake sale of cattle. But it happened. Now, I don't know if perhaps certain segments of society just gets the, maybe you kind of see it in passing and you ignore it, or you just do not hear the message at all. But I think we've reached the point where we have to stop taking things for granted. I know people that leave their car running, leave their stuff in their car open, car running, they go to the shop. Like, I don't understand that anymore. I don't get it. I won't do it. But, oh, it's safe, it's safe. I don't know. At some point, it's not going to be safe, and then people are going to understand. Last thing I'll say before we take a break, I've been going on for quite a bit. There's a crackdown on illegal night parties, and this, I believe the boat sinking in No Man's Land happened a while ago. But now TIMA is looking to go further with this. I do wonder if TIMA is the relevant authority that should be handling this, or if it should be the TTPS. It's one of those weird things, and maybe this is why it was allowed to happen for so long. When you're out on the water, then the laws get a little bit murkier. And our criminal justice legal code has murky areas already. So I guess maybe it's not the TPS, maybe it should be the Coast Guard. What is the relevant body that's supposed to police any activity in our maritime waters, in our littoral zone? And why does it seem like we just don't have that at all? Because, again, we don't have a proper system to monitor these things, apparently. So, of course, all of this smuggling happens, right? And to some extent, it's not just going to be hardcore criminal smuggling. It might be fishermen realizing, hey, no one's policing this. I might as well make some money, in part because if I don't participate in this tomfoolery, the criminals might get nervous at my presence, and maybe they've already threatened the fishermen in order to say, hey, you need to be involved that way. You can't go run into no police about what's happening here. And then that leads now to, well, we could have parties at night. Who's going to stop us? We could bend the rules. Are there even rules? We don't even need to care to look to check. Right? I mean, with regards to another illegal party boat, capsized. We know that no permissions were granted to this vessel. Based on the investigation so far, several requirements related to its license and operations were not in order. We don't need to get things in order. Why? Parliament can't even operate with any degree of sustained order. You expect society to care? When you have the leader of government business disregarding the Speaker of the House because his shouting match with a newly minted opposition MP is more important than observing decorum from his position, regardless of what the other side is doing? Just because they're breaking the rules, why does it give you license to break the rules? All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll go into the latest rounds of our international gas situation that has been affected by the US-Venezuelan situation. Stay tuned. This is Talking About the WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings, extractions, root canal treatment, and complete and partial dentures. Remember, you don't have to brush and floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Struggling with heart health or frequent migraines? Discover the simple steps to reclaim your energy and vitality.
We're diving into a topic that affects about 422 million people around the world: diabetes.
Tune into Wellness Unlocked, the series that delivers expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and well-being. Your health matters. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up, Doc isn't just a title. It's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for, it's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Well, Jamaica is bracing to be hit by Hurricane Melissa, which is now a Category 5 hurricane.
Yeah, this hurricane is expected to make landfall tomorrow morning, then projected to head toward eastern Cuba. ABC's Melissa Adon has more.
Category 5 Hurricane Melissa barreling down on the Caribbean island of Jamaica. The storm with winds 175 miles an hour. Video from U.S. Air Force hurricane hunters tracking Melissa, showing the eye wall, hurricane force winds extending 30 miles from the center. One of the flights into the storm had to turn back after hitting severe turbulence. On Jamaica, heavy equipment working to clear drainage ditches as some areas could get up to 40 inches of rain. The Jamaican government issuing mandatory evacuation orders throughout the island.
It is a directive to save your life, to remove yourself from communities that are extremely vulnerable, the low-lying, flood-prone areas, and to get you to a shelter.
Airports shutting down, leaving some tourists stranded. ABC's Ike Ajachi is in Kingston.
The Caribbean feels like bathwater right now, which is giving Hurricane Melissa so much more strength, producing up to 13 feet of storm surge in some parts.
Melissa has already killed at least 6 people across the Caribbean and caused destruction in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, where officials say nearly 4,000 people are displaced. The U.S. Navy evacuating 1,000 non-essential personnel, family members, and pets out of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. On Jamaica, locals say they're taking the storm seriously.
She's a monster coming, so we have to ensure that we protect life. And while we will be able to build back homes, we will not be able to get back lives.
After crossing through Jamaica, the hurricane expected to weaken, then head towards eastern Cuba and the Bahamas.
Now, hurricanes that hit Jamaica, I saw a report that said the last one was a Category 3 that did a certain amount of damage already. This is a Category 5. It does not necessarily speak directly to the amount of rain that's going to actually come down on Jamaica and to the degree of flooding. They did say, they did expect though 40 inches of rainwater. So what part of it is, what would we do if we're in that situation? Now, while we have crises going on, TNT has said that they're looking to put things in place with regards to hopefully getting resources, supplies, manpower to help deal with the aftermath of whatever it might be. And I believe it is at this point probably ongoing. I believe, I thought it may have hit yesterday, but now it looks like it should be today is the day. That eye, as you saw, that was an aircraft, and it wasn't a small aircraft, by the way, flying within the eye of the hurricane there. It's so large that sunshine might actually come through as it passes overhead. But this is just one of those things where we can only hope for the best, pray, and brace ourselves, because as much as Jamaica is not the size of Venezuela, the last thing the region needs is one of our larger islands with one of the larger populations in the region to be so adversely affected, where people could be displaced from their homes where economic recovery might be shaky. This is the last thing that we need during times like this. It does lead me to wonder at some point, you know, they're talking about sheltering from low-lying areas, and I get it, there's a certain amount of advance warning. Our flooding happens seemingly whenever rain clouds sneeze, but to what extent can we put more things in place for people that might need maybe a dry place to be when there's fears of flooding, or when it floods, a place to readily and easily evacuate to, on top of other things. I don't know if community centers are enough. Are they necessarily built with the express purpose of being storm shelters? I don't know. And again, it goes back to what I just said. What's going to happen if a hurricane like that ever directly hits us? Now, with that said, one of the reasons that complicates this whole situation, and we'll get into it now, is the ongoing crisis with regards to what might be happening in Venezuela. Venezuela has seemingly responded, but they haven't necessarily responded to the Americans, they responded to us. This is a very strange situation where we ourselves, I don't know if we were less gung-ho about it via the attitudes of our Prime Minister. She hasn't said she's for regime change. Maybe we would not have gotten this response. That, however, I think might be naive to say, but we can get into it next. It's time for the Daily Review. So the headline is Maduro cuts gas lines in one daily newspaper, but I don't believe there are any lines to cut per se, right? The deals, however, have more or less been, well, they've been kaput, right? So first of all, yeah, that dragon, hope for the dragon seems to be dead again, right? I'm not entirely sure how it affects the other deals, because some of them, since they're on joint borders, we don't necessarily, potentially, if things break down, do we need their permission per se, right? Now, and look, this is what's interesting. One of the reports says the Venezuelan vice president, and they had comments yesterday that I was supposed to get to, but Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, well, it said the commendation, I believe the recommendation to Maduro, right, citing tensions arising from our Prime Minister's welcoming of the US military. And this is the thing that I was trying to tell the caller yesterday. I understand where the caller came from. You have US ships just, you know, visiting friendly ports of calls in the middle of a crisis zone, right? Even if it is a mundane operation, it's still a diplomatic message being sent. The question is, in this case, what is the message? Now, if it's the case where China is taking umbrage to American ships in Taiwanese ports, it's not as though it's a tense situation, but it's not necessarily one that you expect could be ignited at any point in time. That's more of a, well, we are in solidarity with Taiwan, we will defend Taiwan if you do something. This is a little bit different because the concerns are if the Americans do something first. So the port of call has a little bit more of an aggressive flavor with regards to the message being sent by the Americans coming in. I saw a social media video where at least two V-22 Ospreys, I believe, were delivering Marines to do some of the joint exercises, which implies that the ARG is not too far away from our borders. It might be relatively far to us over the horizon, but they're within aircraft range, right? Very interesting if that's how they're looking to do it. But we are, to some extent, paying the price for our association with America. Now the question is, and here's the thing, some people will say, well, why did Kamala have to be so? I would argue that even if our Prime Minister was even more neutral than she is, right? Once there's any hint or whiff of a connection, even if it's one that we're trying to stay at arm's length away, It's one of the few things the Venezuelans could do to try to affect the situation. They can't threaten America. They can threaten us. They can't necessarily threaten us militarily now. You see, like how they did saber rattling with the Essequibo situation. That'll make sense to do now. That will potentially open the door for more accusations to be leveled on them and for the Americans to take a more aggressive stance against them. What they do is they affect us economically. And the real reason for that, I believe, is because Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, the American administration said, that they will try to help Trinidad. They acknowledge our concerns and our needs, and they're looking to try to do what they can to help us, which usually we take that as the Dragon Deal, trying to allow the Dragon Deal, even though they're the ones that are part of the obstacle for the Dragon Deal not going on, right? But the Prime Minister has come out and has taken a very interesting stance over this. I think this is where she's not necessarily entirely wrong, but the problem is it comes across as a little bit disjointed, because you have to go to the whole timeline of events. The PNM administration inherited a bad natural gas situation, so one of the things that they have been working on was the Dragon Deal. And then seemingly the Dragon Deal became the crown jewel of the PNM's economic policy, right? And then the whole situation with the Venezuelan elections, after getting concessions from the American government, the whole situation in the Venezuelan elections undermined hope for any sort of deal to utilize the gas in the Dragon field. And that was with Biden. Now that Trump's here, the thought was, and I believe rightfully so, if Biden said then they would suspend things, they would reverse the alleviation of sanctions if those elections weren't free and fair. And there's nobody in the international community, and I mean nobody, I've yet to hear any coherent argument to say those elections were free and fair. I even hear anything of any sort of significance from the Venezuelan government, really, right? To try and even fool us in any sort of semi-smart way. So now that Trump was elected, the thought was, hey, we probably weren't going to have it before, but we definitely ain't going to have it now. And PNM administration previously that was there, they took a lot of licks for that. Not because the Dragon Deal collapsed, because it didn't collapse because of anything they did, but because they put so much emphasis on it. They propped it up so much, they gave it so much importance in their communications. Then they want to say, oh, we don't have all the eggs in the Dragon basket. We don't know what the rest of the basket is. So how are we supposed to know for sure that's not where all the eggs are? So the current government and Prime Minister Kamas Bisasa pointed them out, called them out on that. Look, the Dragon is dead. We'll find gas elsewhere. Only to turn around in recent weeks to seemingly get a 6-month OFAC license to try to pursue Dragon again. And try to make it seem as though, hey, I mean, what are y'all complaining about? We're doing a thing. We're trying to do the thing. Similar to how the opposition doesn't understand that their communications are in the context of how they lost the last election. And I don't know if it's all the opposition leaders' fault for this, right? Because some of us think that the members of the opposition might be undermining here. Their internal politics might be more tenuous than we know. But seemingly as a unit, and she is the leader, as a unit, some of their communications at times seems to disregard the fact that it's not just that you lost, but it's how you lose. You can't come now and blame the current administration for things that were going wrong when you were there. And all of a sudden it's their fault. That's not how it works. Similar to the government cannot claim victories that were in process when you were there, they cannot take the blame. You can't have it both ways. But now the Prime Minister, she is to some extent guilty of the same phenomenon. You can't poo-poo on the Dragon Deal, then seemingly put things in place to try to get it back after all of the things that you said were the alternatives We didn't hear anything about them again. So you bring back the dragon. Now that Venezuela has decided to say, hey, no dragon for you, no dragon. Now the Prime Minister is saying, well, the future does not depend on Venezuelan gas. Almost as though dragon is not important. Then it is important. Then it's not important again. And this is within what? 6 months, 4 months? I don't want to say it's hypocritical, but it comes across as inconsistent and potentially incoherent, because the leader needs to set the tone for the country, for the people that they're leading. Part of it is managing expectations, as I always say. And part of that is, this is the direction that we're going towards. We're going so. Dragon is that way, we're going so. But we started off going so. We started off with a vision that said this way. Then the vision took a right turn. Now it's taking a left turn again. And the thing is, nations at this level, you don't just flip a switch and things happen. So when you're saying we're going to try to have an initiative to do something, parts of the private sector, parts of the citizens, they're thinking, okay, what might the government need? What might the people who are doing the work in those things, what might they need? What needs will they think? And people are going to start to put things in place privately. This is how capitalism works. They're going to start to look for opportunities independently of whatever the government projects are doing. And this is how the government will have a project, yes, but then a lot of the support services that they can't necessarily do for themselves is going to spring up via capitalism, via that independent free market, because people are going to look to see, what can I do? Not what corruption piece of the pie I can get out of it, but what legitimately could I do, could I provide? Hey, maybe the project might need certain services, maritime services, marine services, right? Maybe the service providers of those services, maybe they might be hiring. Maybe they themselves might need support services. And this is how you have a platform connected to Dragon. Now you'll have the people that provide the services to that platform. Then you'll need people to provide services to those companies, and so on and so on. Those company offices now will potentially be the nucleus of a mini economy similar to the refinery, where wherever they're based in Trinidad, now those workers need places to have lunch. Now those offices need maintenance workers and potentially security workers, right? They don't just have boats and maybe helicopters, they might also have land vehicles that need to be maintained. So there's businesses for mechanics and so on and so on. AC techs, etc., etc. IT people, communications people. It might give Amplia or whoever, a telecommunications company, a little bit of business as well. So everybody is now looking at your plans as the government and saying, what services might be required and how do we facilitate that? But if you just keep going like this is one of the reasons why the private sector is not known for its initiative. Because governments waffle too much with regards to what is the vision. The vision needs to be what we could get behind. And as a society, we come together, we pull together to make it happen. Because it's not just putting an airport. You build the airport, you need to have flights to the airport. You need people to help, not just government ministers, but all the stakeholders involved to try to get foreign airlines to come to the airport. The airport needs services in the airport. It needs workers, it needs contractors, it would also need various vendors to kind of fill out the airport. You don't want your airport to be bare bones naked. People come to your brand new billion-dollar airport that's supposed to service 3 billion people. There's nothing to eat in the airport. There's nowhere to get water in the airport. The AC is not working. All of these things need to be in place. Not all of them will be provided by the airport's authority. But there may have been people that wanted to be vendors in the airport. I don't know. But now they're hanging because the airport not finished. That Cuba Children's Hospital is another example. Look at where it is. At some point, you could have had a whole slew of supporting industries built around it. But now, this is the other thing that I want to get to. The Prime Minister has said, and to some extent, I can't necessarily blame her for this, although you could still make a case she did not help the situation. Venezuela is not a reliable partner. Sorry, CARICOM is not a reliable partner. They chose Venezuela over Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know how fair that is. In some cases, it's clear that that happened, like with St. Vincent, but then you could understand the economic realities, right? It's not so much that you blame Ralph Gonsalves, oh, you're a bad man because you picked Venezuela over Trinidad. It's that, listen, what do you want to do? Do you want CARICOM or do you want PetroCaribe? Because at some point, it doesn't have to be today, but at some point, you can't have both. One mountain cannot have two tigers. One servant cannot serve two masters. So, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, he has pointed out, the Prime Minister, this is his point of view, the Prime Minister has created major problems for TNT and is now blaming all and sundry except herself and her ministers. And I could understand that to some extent. You can't necessarily say that she's 100% blameless, but I say that not because I'm like, this is specifically what she did wrong. Granted, I will say she could have toned the rhetoric down. But the content of what she said, go after the drug smugglers, we don't want regime change. I can't fault that because at its basic premise, I want that. I've been basically calling for that. I've been basically saying we need foreign help to deal with transnational crime because transnational crime is in theory bigger than us. Our police service cannot go outside of our borders to try to deal with some of the criminal elements, transnational elements at their source. We could deal with what comes through here, but it's so big that the scope of it might be outside of our capacity, no matter how much resources we throw at the situation. So to deal with it from the source, we need the help of the international community. The problem is, and this is where people need to maybe consider or reconsider their stance on Venezuela generally. The international criminal part of it that's originating from Venezuela, I don't think the Venezuelan government is going to do anything about it. That's just me. And now that's part of the reason probably why Trump is thinking this is fine. Because there's a problem that normal means can't solve. I'm willing to go and do abnormal things. The problem is we're so unused to this. It's so beyond the norm that it's making people not just nervous. It's making people upset because the implications, we don't even know. You set this precedent here. How far can it go? That's the nature of politics and international politics. You push the envelope and then all of a sudden the new normal might get more and more extreme. And are we willing to do that? That was basically how woke culture went off the rails. Because you gave people an inch and they took a mile. Do you want to give America said inch in this situation? But I do think what Dr. Brown said was not entirely fair. To say that it's all on Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessa's plate, the responsibility for the situation, it goes back to the point where two things. One, if we want the Dragon deal, we can't push the Americans away. Two, we kind of need the help to deal with any sort of security problems at this point, right? Our Coast Guard is not fit for purpose. Why is very debatable, and there might be very many reasons why. But on top of that, again, some amount of international support is needed for a problem at the scale and scope that it is. To say that we could just blank the Americans or somehow impede them and that will make the situation better, that's the thing. Our Prime Minister could speak out against what the Americans are doing and it probably won't change anything. The real issue is, how will CARICOM look after the dust settles on this, regardless of what happens in Venezuela, whether the Americans go in or not? Again, Kamala Persad-Bissessa, Ralph Gonsalves, the leaders of CARICOM now are not the leaders of CARICOM in perpetuity. And there's no dynastic kingdoms in CARICOM to say royal families of different sovereign territories are going to hold a grudge. But at the end of the day, you still kind of view the actions of a leader of a nation to be the actions of the nation, even if the opposition gets into power in the next election. That's still the acts of TNT. That's still the acts of St. Vincent and Grenadines. That's still the acts of Barbados. What will happen now when the dust settles? Will this derail any sort of CARICOM initiatives? And what makes that very interesting is back to the situation in Jamaica. The situation in Jamaica is ongoing, and listen, we need to help Jamaica, because if it happens to us, we would like CARICOM to help us. You can't expect something from some people and have less expectations for yourself. You can't demand something from someone but unwilling to give up that for yourself. So this thing that's going to hit Jamaica, fingers crossed, because every now and then, you know, I mean, it happened here in TNT on a much lesser scale. We weren't facing a storm of this magnitude, but there was a time when the then Rowley administration, spearheaded by Farah Sawari, did a good job preparing for what could have been a major disaster in TNT. Of course, it didn't happen, and they didn't know how to not look silly, so they made themselves look silly, and then flood responses was never given that level of attention. But that one time when they did all the dog and pony show, the press conferences, they put everything in place, that was some of the most impressive things that administration did within the last, 3 years or 2 years, and they just kind of let it fall by the wayside for whatever reason. But the point in that example is, we didn't need the preparation. It was good to have it, though. It was good to have it. Now, Jamaica, fingers crossed. Who knows? Maybe things might not be as bad. But given the size of the storm, the wind speed, and the fact that it's not necessarily hitting Jamaica at the tip, it's going through Jamaica at its narrow area. So it's not going to maybe just hit lengthways the tip and start to slow down. It'll slow down when it crosses Jamaica, but before that, Jamaica's probably going to get, a lot of Jamaica's going to get hit by the winds just before the eye of the storm, which is going to be the worst part of it. And they're going to want help. They're going to need help. And while the Prime Minister is saying that CARICOM is not a reliable partner, at least the verbal indications are, we will help Jamaica. This is something that no Caribbean nation could afford not to do. If the volcano in St. Vincent and Grenadines erupts tomorrow, we go tomorrow, regardless of what they said about this whole Venezuelan situation and what we say, and if they disagree with us and if they disagree with the Americans or whatever. We go tomorrow. Because at times, especially like this is when we need each other. Even if we get help from Europe and America and Latin America and so forth, it's further away. It'll take longer. At the very least, we need to be willing and able to respond to each other's emergencies, because we could respond sooner than anywhere else, at least to some degree, at certain scales. So, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll open the phone lines, continue conversation maybe about what's going on in Jamaica. This is a heavy time for the Caribbean. I mean, maybe Grenada was a heavier time, but look, we have a potential conflict, we have a hurricane, we have at least one of the major Caribbean, larger Caribbean nations in a state of emergency with crime. What else could happen? I mean, West Indies did lose catastrophically last week, but hey, what could I say? That's just cricket, right? We can't even take that seriously. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Stay tuned.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios. But they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, They deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
The Caribbean has some of the highest rates of overweight and obesity in the Americas.
Parents are usually meticulous about what goes into their children's mouths from 0 to 1 year. But then something happens after 1 year when we say to them, eat from the family pot. Right. Somehow the family pot extends to snacks, both sugary and salty, soft drinks and candies of all descriptions.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
This is 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region.
Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Remember waking up early just to catch your favorite cartoons? WESN brings back those magical mornings with Retro Saturdays.
Thus, the Powerpuff Girls were born!
Where the young at heart relive the fun. Join us every Saturday from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, only on WESN, the content capital.
I'm back and talking about WSN. Now's the time we open up the phone lines. We want to hear from you, the viewers. We already have a comment. We'll get to the comment in a bit. The phone lines are open. You can call in at any time, however, and join the conversation and butt in. That's fine. That's more than fine and more than welcome. But while we wait, we also have some more footage to show, and this is with regards to some of the aftermaths. The guys here in the studio, they're reminding me, look, it's not just Jamaica, right? And you can understand, American reporting is going to be centered on Jamaica because they have that link, the diaspora, the familial ties, right? And I don't know necessarily to what extent they also have potentially any sort of US people there, but in Dominican Republic and Haiti, and in some ways, it's even harder to think about Haiti being hit by this storm. I'm not too sure if they face the severity of the Category 5 winds when it hits, but it doesn't have to be Category 5 for devastation to occur. I mean, if you look at not just the level of the water, but the violence of the water, the flow of the water, arguably, right now I think there's only reportedly 4 deaths in Dominican Republic and Haiti. 1 in Haiti, 3 in Haiti and 1 in the Dominican Republic. There were, as of yesterday, 3 deaths in Jamaica already. Don't ask me how exactly that happened. But this is one of the things where the situation, just from this one hurricane alone, we're going to have our own agendas, we're going to have our own needs, we're going to have our own wants. That is to say, the various states in the Caribbean, the various nations of CARICOM. But at a time when everyone is nervous about what's going on with Venezuela, we need to be keeping an eye on this. Haiti already is in a bad spot. Dr. Traoré already said Haiti, I'm sorry, and to some degree, I know we have a cynical view on politics, but I actually believed him when he said that. It's not as though we in TNT could solve all of Haiti's problems for them. We can't foot the bill for that, right? But if you look at the situation here and how these countries are going to be affected, and this is the thing, remember, island nations are isolated from any sort of other landmass by the sea. Supplies have to come by boat, and it's not necessarily going to be the fastest thing at times. Now, sea logistics, though, that's the most efficient thing. So it helps, but things like this, the damage that's incurred to structures, the damage that's incurred to appliances, to furniture, the damages that are incurred to food supply. If you were banking on local agriculture in these areas, well, that's done. That produce is no longer usable, really. And that's why the water is going to be contaminated. So it's not just Jamaica. There are other islands in the Caribbean. And listen, this is just 1 year, 1 hurricane in 1 year. It's Melissa, right? Who knows? We might get another storm come through toot sweet before the end of the year and hit somewhere else. And of course, there's always next year. We have to try and figure out some way to stay together and not be fractured. I don't know, however, if CARICOM could really, maybe this is why CARICOM has never necessarily moved forward. We have Faisal on the line. Good morning, caller, you on there.
Good morning, Sean. Good morning.
Morning.
Sean, I want to roll back a little bit. Yesterday afternoon, I heard the Prime Minister made some announcements via 2 television stations that she is ready and standing by to assist Jamaica in any way that is possible, because she would have had conversation with the Prime Minister of Jamaica with respect to that. Yes? They are now opening up some catchment area for people to donate stuff, so they'll be organizing to have it sent out ASAP as soon as practical. The other thing, Sean, who are the beneficiaries of the Caribbean deal, Petro-Caribbean? Are you there with me, Sean?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm looking up now. I don't. Well, if you know, you could go ahead.
Yeah. So okay. We need to find who are the real beneficiaries of the Petro-Caribbean deal, because remember, Venezuela is the one that is really in charge of that deal to a great extent in terms of their contribution to the project. Secondly, Dr. Rowley and company was in government for approximately 9.5 years, nothing, no major progress would have been made with respect to the Dragon deal. The progress they would have made was during Mr. Biden's tenureship and coming through. So it clearly indicates that Trump didn't want to have anything to do with that. So they get it under Biden. When they got it under Biden, they went and they had people came in here at midnight. Don't feel Trump wasn't looking at that type of behavior. Clearly, that would suggest which side of the line you're on. So I think that now Trump is back in power. He did what he thinks was right when he revoked the license. That's according to him. I'm not saying it's right for us. But that's just the geopolitics. Yes? So I think that the Prime Minister is doing what is in the best interest of Trinidad and Tobago. But let's assume that Venezuela wants to be aggressive to Trinidad and Tobago military. Which one of the other Caribbean islands have the ability to help stand with us to protect us? So, we have to be sensible in the whole thing. Look what happened in Guyana. If the Americans didn't intervene, what would have been the case in Guyana, in Colombia, in Brazil, all those Latin American countries. Venezuela has been making threats to them. And they had to have outside intervention to help them protect themselves. We are no different, Sean. Let's not be foolhardy and think that we could take a hardline position. The Prime Minister has taken a position. She's not for war. She does not support war. What she supports is the protection of her citizens and her country. Thank you very much, my brother.
Thank you, caller. And look, this is just to show the situation, the international situation. International community is not the be-all and end-all of ethics and morality. Because San Suu Kyi, if my memory serves correct, I'm kind of going off of memory, President of Myanmar, what happened, just after COVID, or within, after the first year of COVID or second year, there was a coup. It was condemned by the international community. We got all the right things to say, because I believe San Suu Kyi won some international award with regards to who will work with the democratic, being an advocate. I can't remember what the award was for. She got some international award, something major. But the point is, all the international community condemned the coup, which removed her from power, and the military junta took over. She won the election. She won the democratic election. The military just took back power. Dare I ask, do we think it's the right thing to say, let them sort their problems out? Let's leave them to their own devices. Because they are a sovereign state. Despite the fact that the legitimate government of said sovereign state was overthrown by the military. And the international community did nothing. Why? Because I believe nobody wanted to do anything. It's similar to Israel, Palestine. Nobody actually wants to do anything about it. Outside of talk. They want to talk, but they don't want to intervene. Because who wants to be involved in that? There's nothing in it for us. We have another caller on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning, Sean. Good morning to your listeners.
Morning, morning.
Your first caller, your first caller, I had the same issue. He called it petrochemical.
Petro-Caribe. I have the
Caribe.
Yeah, I have the list of the members here in front of me.
Gonzal have plenty interest in that.
Yes.
Why he have plenty interest in that? I remember Chavez come to the Caribbean, right, and said, "All it take gas, take oil for 10 years. All you had to pay. 10 years after, you had to pay." And I think the 10 years up, if you all can remember that. You understand? And there's a lot of things, these things that happen. Right? And they have the interest. And well, I have more to say, but I'll call back on that. Right.
Thank you, caller. Yeah, the first summit, 12 members are from CARICOM, 14 countries on the first summit. Antigua and Barbuda, Bahamas, Belize, Cuba, Dominica, Grenada, Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and Grenadines, Suriname, 11, well, then there's Venezuela. And of course, you have Haiti, Nicaragua afterwards. Guatemala apparently left at some point, right? So that's, I think, 12 countries left. Sorry, it has a total of 80 members, but again, Guatemala was in 2013 apparently stated that they left. I'm not too sure if they're still there. So, listen, to some extent, if that's what was best for you at the time, that's fine. But now when we have competing interests, I guess part of it is how do you handle the competing interests, right? Case in point, Germany and the rest of Europe ain't advertising that they need Russian gas more than Ukraine independence, which is crazy because it also impacts their own national security. We have another call on the line. Caller, good morning. You're on the air.
Morning, Sean.
Morning.
A quick question.
Yes.
And I think the public should ask themselves, how can one deal with a country who have lost 20 to 25% of the population from what your governance policy is? And that is what has happened to Venezuela. How can we sit idly by and deal with a regime does that to its own population? 70%, sorry, 20-25% has gone from Venezuela. Why you are running from your own country? Because you are persecuted. You have no hope. So for us to continue to deal with a regime like that questions our ability to think. The fact is, Venezuela has never offered Trinidad and Tobago anything. Just name me something Venezuela has offered us. Yes, the CARICOM, most of the CARICOM countries has benefited from oil, etc., from Maduro, and that is what he has done. He has bought them over.
Yes.
They have abandoned CARICOM, or put it as our Prime Minister has abandoned Trinidad. Remember, 1 from 10 leaves 0. That is why when Eric William left, he said not going to foot the bill of the West Indies Federation because none of the other CARICOM wanted to have that burden. When Basil Pandit did the shipwright agreement, he was the first. He didn't have no support from CARICOM because he saw where we were going in terms of narcotic trade and things like that. So I agree with our Prime Minister, and this might be a blessing in disguise for our country moving forward. Diversify.
Yes.
Let us build a country that we can probably mitigate the vagaries of uncertainty. We have it. We can do it. Let us not put all our egg in a basket that only produce dragon egg. Have any of us ever seen a dragon egg? I go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. Dr. Justin Ram also said this. I saw it on TV last night where he said something similar. Because when you think about it, ironically, the administration, the Prime Minister, is paying the price not for trying to do the dragon deal again, but showing an inconsistent message, right? Now, in part, this is an issue not because it's inconsistent per se, but rather because of how you framed it the first time, it made it feel inconsistent the second time, and now you're kind of looking like you have egg on your face now that you have to change directions again to go back to no dragon, right? So we're doing this, right? Now, there's a world where you could have pointed out what the PNM government was doing, where you disagreed with them, and if you didn't necessarily include all the bubble, then when it came time to having to try to get the dragon and you can't get the dragon again, it wouldn't look so bad. there's more to say on this, but we have Sanford on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on here.
Morning, Sean.
Morning.
You hear me, Sean?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
You know, I listened to your callers this morning talking about trying to pronounce on Petrocaribe. I think the last caller that talked about the Federation, and when Dr. Williams said 1 from 10 leaves 0, that statement has been so misunderstood and taken out of context by ill-informed people in Trinidad and Tobago. Ill-informed people. They need to go back and read and understand what happened in the Federation and why Dr. Williams made that statement. That's first thing. The Petrocaribe agreement started in 2005. 2005. And what I have a problem with is you are pronouncing over a program, and ill-informed people are making statements that are not true on that arrangement and all that transpired with that Petrocaribe agreement, and it has been allowed to be said as if it is true. And I think you need to go and read the Petrocaribe agreement and understand why it was enacted, and what are the benefits, and why only Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados didn't sign the Petrocaribe agreement. A lot of people don't understand. We had a refinery, so we couldn't sign a Petrocaribe agreement, and Barbados was the headquarters at the time for Shell in the Caribbean, Shell downstream, and for Texaco's downstream, which eventually became Chevron downstream. So they couldn't sign either, because they had Barbados had strategic interests. Those were the head offices. The tanker fleets that those two companies operated out of Barbados. So they couldn't sign the agreement. And what triggered, and what was the trigger for the agreement is because of high oil prices. Anytime the oil price went over $40 a barrel, that triggered the discounts in the agreement. And it was 20 to 25 years payback period. And the Caribbean islands could not scoff at a deal that was that good, because they are small economies, and a large part of the cost is power, electricity, gasoline, and those sort of things to run the island. People need to get their facts straight, and not trying to demonize Venezuela for something that Venezuela did. It wasn't only the Caribbean islands. It wasn't even only people in Latin America. There were African countries that signed on to the Petrocaribe agreement, something similar. They didn't call it Petrocaribe, but it was a similar agreement. People need to get their facts straight. But I don't like when I hear this narrative, and people are contributing to and not understanding or not knowing the full agreement, or not understanding the facts around the arrangement and pronouncing on it. Have a good day.
Caller, I understand where you're coming from. I do find this very interesting, because to some extent, and I'm not saying you do it, but your argument has a certain it's at a certain level. It's at a certain bar, right? It's under certain parameters, and it's not necessarily, maybe I should rephrase. The point is, I understand that the interests of the Caribbean nations were valid. That doesn't mean, however, that Venezuela at the end of the day did it for influence. And it doesn't mean that now the chickens have come home to roost. The chickens came home to roost with Germany and the oil pipeline from Russia. They had valid motivations to do it. They thought if we engage with Russia in trade, it would limit the propensity for aggressive military action west by Russia. That proved not to be true, because international relations are more complex. I understand we didn't do the deal, Barbados didn't do the deal. The fact of the matter is, we have now reached a point where, regardless of the intentions of when it happened, it was a thing. It garnered influence that now the current Venezuelan regime is capitalizing on. Because look at what they're doing technically to us. Arguably, I get it, the sentiments expressed by the Prime Minister makes it seem that we're anti-Maduro. I understand that. But I would argue, even if the Prime Minister had a neutral stance to the Venezuelan government, an actual neutral stance, not the one that she's claiming neutrality and that we have good relations, but we all know that's kind of not really the case. I don't know why she's saying that, because it's a thing where she's trying to not reveal what's going on behind the scenes, while Venezuela is more than happy to be naked with the truth. They're utilizing us as leverage against the Americans because they have no other leverage. So they're also utilizing Alba and Petrocaribe as leverage against Americans because they have no other leverage. That's just the nature of the beast. And it comes up to now, what is Petrocaribe's, the nations that signed on to that, what's their priority? CARICOM or Petrocaribe? I'm not saying that, because I said it before you called, that the needs could be valid. I said something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing myself. I can't remember exactly how I put it. But that doesn't mean that now we're in a situation where the interests are diverged, and can we say CARICOM is together, regardless of if it's good, proper, well-intentioned reasoning or not. The result is the same. We have a call on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Yeah, morning, brother.
Morning.
Yeah, no, I empathize with you in reference to the last caller's position. But I empathize with you because you are at an age where you may not have been aware of some of these historical facts. And what you would have is people calling you and distorting the historical situation as it was at the time. And for you, you're not in a position to say yeah or nay, or this is how it was. Mm-hmm. So I understand and empathize with your situation, but he did have a point when he says you are sitting there and people are making statements that are not entirely true, many half-truths, and you are not stopping. But you can't do that because you do not know the history. You may not have may not have been around at the time, and you may not have read it, and there was no compulsion on you to read that particular issue. So I understand that. But beside that, I want to say, in terms of the Prime Minister's conduct, first she came out and said that the Dragon deal is dead. We're going to Grenada. Then she spoke to Rubio, and she said we now have the license for the Dragon deal, so it's now alive again. Now Venezuela has made a statement and said the Dragon deal is off. I quite understand, Venezuela. I quite understand Venezuela's position because you have aligned yourself with what is called gunboat policy coming from the United States. You have made your country a satellite of the United States, and there's threats against my country. So I'm saying in that scenario, in Venezuela is saying in that scenario, there's no more communication with respect to that. And then after that, now you gone off on a Fox and the Grapes tangent, and you're cussing me down, and both of us cussing one another. But what is Trinidad's position? Here you have a situation where one of your neighbors had 12 guns, one had 3, and both of them in a big argument challenging one another. You could take 3 positions. You could join the man with the 12 guns, as Trinidad has done. You could join the man with the 3, or you could stay neutral. And I think the position for Trinidad in such a situation is neutral. Friends of all, satellite of none. We have become a satellite of the United States, and if a war really breaks out under the convention, we will be a necessary target for Venezuela. They will be within their rights to target Trinidad and Tobago if any war breaks out, as being, an aggressor towards them. So the question about the country being uneasy and the advent of war is at our doorsteps, is a real one, and the government is trying to play that down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. I mean, I understand what you and the previous caller, Mr. Stanvan, are saying, and I'm not going to try to say that you're wrong. What I will say, though, is this. I don't agree with basically the implied narrative. Because my position from the very beginning is everybody has their own agenda. And to some extent, if you think I am judging agendas, with some agendas are more moral than others, let me clear that up. There is no such thing as morality when it comes to the agendas of sovereign nations and the independent agendas that they all have that competes against each other. There is no such thing as morality. At that level, politics has an even greater morality of its own. So my thing is, I'm not willing to look at the history and say, oh, it was all done for benevolent reasons. My thing is, just like how America has their agenda in the region, Venezuela had their agenda in the region. And their agenda included getting influence diplomatically to compete with the United States. They positioned themselves, Chavez did, for a long time. So I'm not looking at it with rose-colored glasses. I am just being practical. This is the result. Regardless of what the caller said, what the history was, what the public intentions of the initiative, what was stated in the press and said in the press conferences. When you look at it from the lens of political cynicism, that should be applied to every political body, not just our own country and the Americans and the former colonial masters, right? Let's be frank. Everybody will do what the former colonial masters did if they were in position to do it. There's nothing to suggest that they wouldn't. It's similar to Nazi Germany. Everybody thinks they will be the one to save the Jews and risk their life. No. Most of us, I don't know if I would do it, so I can't say that I would. Most of us would conform because we would not want to step out of line and risk our own necks. That is basic human psychology, as ugly as it is. I'm not faulting the Petro-Caribbean countries. I'm just pointing out, now we have a situation where the needs of some CARICOM members competes, and it didn't start with us, it started with Guyana, competes with their energy needs, their individual agendas. It's not necessarily an immoral thing that they're doing, but at the end of the day, it is a divergence. And to call out Trinidad and Tobago, and I'll say more on this, but we have a caller, to call out TNT as the main and only culprit in the divergence, I don't agree with, right? We take the call, good morning. I still have a comment to get to. We'll get to that. Caller, good morning, you're on here.
Yeah, sure. I was referring, don't mind I couldn't pronounce, but I was right. If two countries didn't sign, according to the caller, San Fernando, if two countries didn't sign Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados because we have a situation, I wasn't referring to that. I was referring to St. Vincent did not sign on to Trinidad. They were part of Trinidad and Tobago, and they did not sign on. They went to the deal. But my point is, the deal is now kicking in for them to pay back to Venezuela. So if they had to suck up to Venezuela, Gonzalez is doing that and making it sound like that.
Yeah,
that is my point. It had nothing to do with the history to go who signed on. I was talking specifically Gonzalo. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. I think this is the case where, regardless of what the actual specifics are, if this was a domestic situation, it would be a case where now you have to question conflict of interest, right? In that, when you speak of CARICOM, are you free and unfettered of any influence that might be influencing your words, any external agenda that might be influencing your position? Can we say no? I don't think so. I don't think we could say Ralph Gonzalez, when he speaks about CARICOM and the Venezuelan situation, the US situation, that there's no external influence coming from Venezuela, right? Now, again, to some extent, we'll never know to the degree unless someone does a book and has the receipts. We ain't gonna get that right now. We ain't gonna get that right now. And again, it doesn't have to be bad. But it is what it is, because that is what politics is. We have another caller on the line. Caller, good morning.
Hello?
Yes, morning.
Yes, Sean. I want to throw one thing on the table again. Can you live in a country, or is it right that you have an opposition leader who is in hiding, who is also a Nobel Prize winner?
Yeah.
Well, tell me,
yeah,
what kind of government would have a opposition leader go into hiding for fear of being arrested, or whatever case might be?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that sends a great message. And do you know? And a lot of people not saying, people are complaining that we have the U.S. vessels in our waters, yes, and most in international waters. But do you know, 2 weeks prior to the election, there were U.S. submarines in the Caribbean off Cuba, and that was picked up by the American radar? Sean?
Cuba, American submarines or Cuban submarines? Sorry,
Russian submarines.
Russian submarines.
Russian.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
caller.
Were off Cuba.
Caller.
Just 2 weeks prior to the election.
I understand where you're going, but the thing is, submarines do things like that all the time.
Yeah, but I'm saying to you.
Yes.
But I never did hear one of these people from the so-called peace zone of peace movement, ever mention that. Never did. Does Venezuela account to us what naval vessels from Russia or China visit their country? Would that have ever been a concern to us?
I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but the context isn't quite the same. To be fair to the people who have presented the other side or case for the other point of view. The context of the two situations are not exactly the same.
Yeah, but I'm saying to you, Sean, there is a build-up. Things evolve from stage to stage. I remember when we had Shogun, the Honorable Patrick Manning would have assisted Grenada, St. Vincent, and all of them by donation of vehicles, help St. Vincent build the airport and what have you. You know, just the other day, Ralph Gonzalez called me money. Oh God, where is the gratitude?
Mm-hmm.
Where is the gratitude? Trinidad economy is a little difficulty now. And again, the zone of peace, people, rather than come on board and understand what is happening, choose to condemn and humiliate Trinidadians. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, caller. Now, the thing is, submarine patrols happen all the time. Russian submarines off the American coast, American submarines off the Russian coast, etc., etc. They happen all the time, right? American submarines in close proximity to the naval vessels of foreign powers, and every now and then they might, ping their sonar right in the middle of a Chinese or Russian formation just to say, hey, I'm here, so you could know that I could come right in the middle of your entire squadron or fleet whenever I want to, and you won't even know that I'm doing it at the time. There's a lot of that with regards to submarines. Coming to a port of call, again, I said it, coming to a port of call, even a heightened situation, isn't necessarily looking to mean anything. But in this case, it's not quite the same. It's not quite the same because the American president is implying or saying, depending on what level you're at, a purpose for this. Also, the fact that if it was a destroyer that went to the Southern Caribbean or a submarine, that's one thing. But it's a major formation at this point. And the ARG's deployment is something not to be taken lightly, right? That is a bigger indicator that this is on a different level than any submarine in the area or any missile destroyer in the area, right? Also, the commitment of Air Force assets, I believe staging from Puerto Rico, that's also an indicator. Just sending some ships, even the flyovers with a B-52 or B-1 That doesn't necessarily mean anything long term, but the ARG's commitment, you committed the deployment cycle of this asset for the next 6 months to a year, or however long it's going to be, that you're going to keep them out there. And potentially, when you relieve them, you're not just going to relieve them and leave the zone. You're going to potentially replace this ARG with another ARG if the situation has sustained itself, right? Do we have another call? Okay. So here's the thing. I understand what you're saying about the airport funds and stuff like that. To some extent, I'm not really going to fault Ralph Gonzalez for that. I do understand, look, he has his needs, his situation, and he's going to do what's best for him. And to some extent, I think he's thinking, look, Trinidad, your economy is in a crapper. Why are you trying to mess with your neighbor who could be an economic partner to you? The flip side to that is this, to the analogy that the other caller used. The guy with the 12 guns, he's not just the guy with more guns. He's also a major trading partner for us. We can't afford any more tariffs or sanctions. We got hit 15%. I don't know why we got hit 15% tariffs when Trump was giving the baseline was 10%. Why did we not get the baseline? I don't know, right? But let's be frank, America is very aware of Trinidad and Tobago. I don't necessarily know how they view us, right? But to say that it's only about taking sides in the Venezuela-US thing, no. We have long-term considerations with our diplomatic relations with the United States that we also have to consider that could be playing out of this. We could be influenced because of that. Whether it's ethical or not, that's a whole other question. Can't do that right now. San Fernando line. Still have to get to that comment. Good. Welcome back, San Fernando.
Yes, Sean. What I wanted to say, which is pertinent to what I said previously. Mm-hmm. Even though those Caribbean countries signed on to the Petro-Caribbean agreement, it was not an exclusive purchase agreement with Venezuela. So all those countries that signed on to the Petro-Caribbean agreement in the Caribbean continued to buy product from Trinidad and Tobago during the life of the Petro-Caribbean agreement. But Petro-Caribbean kind of petered out in 2018 when the refinery closed down. And Venezuela had the issues. But with every island continued to buy product from Trinidad and Tobago. They continued to buy LPG, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel during the life of the Petro-Caribbean agreement. So it wasn't as if they abandoned Trinidad and Tobago and they were only purchasing from Venezuela. And I want that has to be said to understand that this wasn't that the Caribbean abandoned Trinidad and Tobago. But they had a deal, they got a deal, and they purchased some from them, but they continued purchasing from Trinidad and Tobago continuously, monthly. If anybody wants to challenge me on that, let them come. Have a good day, Sean.
Thanks. Now, here's the thing, and I get that, and that goes, to some extent, that supports what I just said. It's like, look, this is not all nefarious, mustache-twirling villainy going on, right? Now, I agree with the caller when he pointed out the fact that what's going on with Venezuela, the opposition leader, she couldn't even run. She couldn't even run, right? People want to point out the Supreme Court in the United States. Listen, what's going on in the United States and their Supreme Court, I don't think is on the level of what's going on in Venezuela and their Supreme Court. That's just my opinion. That's just my opinion. But that election that happened was listen, Trump was voted out. Whatever you think of the American government, Trump was voted out. You think Maduro could be voted out? It's not the same thing if you want to compare conceptually tyranny in both situations and political corruption in both situations. They're not the same. So it comes back to this. This is the unstated ethical dilemma that none of the other regional countries want to even breach the subject, and to some extent, even us and the Americans. Although the Americans, it could be because more that they just don't necessarily go in depth in the actual issue. The ethics of the situation. You have a nation that is in a negative situation, and it most likely cannot get itself out of that situation anytime soon. And as long as that situation persists, the people, at least some of the people, not necessarily all, because you have to have those that prop up the regime, they are suffering. They might not be suffering like how some Haitians are suffering. They might not be suffering like how some Africans are suffering in certain conflict zones, but they are suffering. They are suffering more than us. They're suffering more than a lot of the Caribbean, because what they're going through is very different to what we go through on a day-to-day basis. The flip side to that is because it's an ethical dilemma. Yes, regime change could in theory solve it, but regime change could also make the Venezuelan situation worse. Regime change made, at least to some extent, the Iraqi situation worse. It solved the problem of Saddam Hussein. It did not necessarily improve the lives in the long run of the Iraqi people. So you have an ethical dilemma. But people are only, whatever side of the argument you take, not everybody is appreciating the fact that it's not a clear-cut, my side is right, your side is wrong. And that's what I have an issue with a lot of the messaging with regards to the academics and the politicians over this matter. Because they want to make it out as though their side is 100% morally justified. There's absolutely no moral justification on the other side. Meanwhile, at the end of the day, at least Haiti has some veneer of a democratic government. And the situation in Venezuela could only continue to devolve. It will probably get worse before it gets better. And we run the risk, this is the thing, regime change is very risky. But leaving the status quo and hoping for the best is not risk-free. The uncertainty of everything makes pointing to say this decision is the best decision very difficult, right? So I understand people who want to say, don't just do regime change. Don't automatically do that. Don't think it's going to be a panacea for all our problems, a silver bullet. But you have to take into account the fact that, A, that situation in Venezuela is not as though it's hunky-dory, right? Venezuelans aren't just living their lives, happy-go-lucky, everything is sunshine and rainbows over there, and things are great. And America's going to come and upset a good thing. Arguably, it's not a good thing, right? The truth has been obfuscated enough that it's difficult to know for sure how bad it is. So to say, must have regime change, you can't say that. I want to get back quickly before, no, we have to end. So Justin Rami also said this might be a blessing in disguise because it might force us into more diversity. And I, to some extent, agree with that. I just don't know. There'll be a lot of growing pains. I think it was very telling that the current regime tried to go back to Dragon. It seems as though they see that it was necessary. They were willing to take the risk on how it will look, because it will probably look bad, as it did, and it is what it is now. It's very interesting that they tried to go there. Now they're trying to change and switch their tune back. We have to see how it works out for us moving forward, because that might be a sign that our immediate needs are worse than we think, despite the fact that they're trying to claim only a $3 billion and change deficit in the budget. Let's just flash the comment quick. This comment is speaking with regards to road safety and drinking and driving and breathalyzer tests and et cetera, This goes back to what I'm saying. Believe it or not, on some level, this sort of stuff where the commenter is not seeing the police, granted, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. You don't actually physically see every road traffic accident that happens, but they happen, right? Just because you don't see it doesn't happen. But there's a lot of drinking and driving on the roads. We flouted our road safety laws openly, right? If we are not a society of law and order, it will trickle down. And when it comes time now to have big decisions with regards to the direction of the country, with regards to who we ally to internationally, all of these things, this will trickle, well, not trickle down, it will actually trickle up. It'll go upward, right? There appears to be very little effort. It's a combination of a lack of equipment, because they moved on from paper tickets, and they literally can't. So if they don't have a tablet, from what I understood, at least at one point in time, this is from Roger Alexander, if they don't have a tablet, they can't give tickets. That's why some police officers do nothing when they see road traffic violations. Also, issues with the road traffic laws, and with criminal law in particular. The demerit point situation, I'm not sure if they actually followed through and finished off doing whatever they were supposed to do with that. So there's a lot of gaps in our laws. There's a lot of gaps in our police procedure, although we are in a state of emergency. So it should be covering up some of them. But it seems as though drinking and driving culturally is accepted enough that the police don't always go after it as much as they should. In part because, as the media ambassadors say, if we enforce all the laws, people will get upset. Think about it. You put an extra tax or duty on alcohol, on importation, and on manufacturing. It's a luxury good, but we view it as a necessity, culturally. And is that a good thing? I argue it is not. And that sort of sentiment is the beginning, and similar to low-level favors turn into corruption, low-level law-breaking turns into big-level law-breaking if you let it become culturally, systemically ingrained in your nation. We will close with that, folks. I want to thank the callers and the commenter for pointing out the comment. I'm sorry I don't have more time to go into your words specifically. Stay safe. Pray for Jamaica. Pray for the Dominican Republic. Pray for Haiti. Pray for the people of Venezuela. Pray for ourselves. There are people, particularly in South Trinidad, stockpiling supplies now. It'll be very interesting to what degree we have to worry about our own supplies while we also try to help Jamaica. There's no right answer in these moral dilemmas. All I could say is do the best that you can with what you have. Don't forget your brother. Be his keeper, whether it's domestic or foreign, so that we could see each other tomorrow. Stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic. Be nice. Bye-bye.
WESN